The crack of the whip echoed through the dusty square of Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, 1876, making Lillian Kane flinch against the rough wooden post where her wrists were bound. Blood trickled down her back, soaking through the tattered remnants of her once fine dress. But she refused to cry out again. She wouldn't give the leering crowd that satisfaction. "This one, spirited gentleman," shouted the auctioneer, a portly man with yellowed teeth and whiskey breath, caught trying to escape from her rightful owner in Kansas City. "Papers say she's property, fair and square." Lillian bit her lip until she tasted blood. She was no man's property, never had been. The papers were forgeries created after outlaws murdered her father and kidnapped her from their homestead 3 months ago. But who would believe a woman with no family, no connections, and no money? $20, someone called from the crowd. "30, shouted another. The auctioneer grinned. "She's worth more than that, boys. Look at her, young, strong, and she can read and write too. Good for more than just cooking, if you catch my meaning." Coarse laughter rippled through the crowd of miners, drifters, and ranch hands who had gathered for the illegal auction. Slavery had been abolished for more than a decade, but in remote territories like this, the law was whatever men with guns said it was. "Disobedient, though," the auctioneer continued, bringing the whip down again across her shoulders. Lillian jerked but remained silent. "Needs a firm hand." At the edge of the crowd, Heath Daniels tightened his grip on his worn Stetson. His jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. He'd come to town for supplies, not to witness a woman being sold like cattle. The 28-year-old rancher had seen plenty of ugliness in his years on the frontier, but this turned his stomach. $50, called a burly man with a scar running down his face. 75, countered a well-dressed gambler type with cold eyes. Heath's hand instinctively moved to the leather pouch on his belt, where he kept his savings, $212. Every cent he had managed to scrape together over months of back-breaking work. It was meant for breeding stock to expand his small ranch, his dream of building something that would last. The scarred man raised his hand again. 100. The gambler smiled thinly. 150. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with greed. "Do I hear more for this fine specimen?" Heath saw the woman's shoulders straighten despite her obvious pain, saw the defiance in her posture even as the auctioneer raised his whip again. 175, the scarred man shouted. 200, the gambler countered smoothly. The auctioneer grinned. Going once. Heath's feet moved before his mind caught up. He pushed through the crowd. $212, he called out, his voice carrying across the square. A murmur ran through the crowd as he approached the auction block. The gambler gave Heath a measured look, then shrugged and stepped back. 212, the auctioneer repeated, sounding disappointed that the bidding might be ending. Going once. Going twice. 220, the scarred man growled, glaring at Heath. Heath felt his stomach sink. He had nothing more to offer. He'd already bid every cent he owned. Then his fingers touched the silver pocket watch his father had given him before he died. The only thing of value he had left in the world besides his small homestead. $212, Heath said, stepping forward and pulling out the pouch of money. Plus this. He held up the gleaming silver watch. Solid silver, worth at least $50. The auctioneer's eyes lit up with avarice. He snatched the watch and examined it closely, then nodded. Sold. The scarred man spat on the ground but backed away, grumbling. As the auctioneer moved to untie the woman, he raised his whip one more time, seemingly for the pleasure of it. Heath's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist in a grip that made him wince. No one touches her, Heath said, his voice low and dangerous. Not anymore. The crowd fell silent. The auctioneer tried to pull away, but Heath's grip was like iron. After a tense moment, the man dropped the whip. Heath released him and stepped forward, gently untying the woman's bonds himself. Up close, he could see she was trembling slightly, though whether from fear, pain, or rage, he couldn't tell. Her eyes, a startling shade of deep green, met his with a wariness that cut him to the quick. "My name is Heath Daniels," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I have a small ranch outside of town. You'll be safe there until you decide what you want to do." "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and screaming. Heath didn't have a good answer. He just knew he couldn't have lived with himself if he'd ridden away. "Because it was wrong," he finally said. "Now, can you walk?" Lillian nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. Her legs felt weak, and her back burned with every movement. But she'd be damned if she'd show weakness in front of these men. Heath took off his coat and draped it carefully over her shoulders, mindful of her wounds. The unexpected gentleness of the gesture nearly broke her composure. She'd forgotten what kindness felt like. As Heath led her away from the auction block, the scarred man stepped into their path. "You overpaid, Cowboy," he sneered. "I'd have broken her in and sold her back to you for half that in a month." Heath's hand hovered near his holster. "Step aside." The man laughed but moved out of the way. "She ain't worth it, friend." "I'm not your friend," Heath replied coldly, guiding Lillian past. He led her to where his horse was hitched outside the general store. The bay gelding snorted and stamped, sensing the tension. "Can you ride?" Heath asked. Lillian nodded again. She'd grown up on horseback before her father's murder. "I'll help you up, then walk alongside until we're out of town," Heath said. "It's about 5 miles to my place." "I can't take your coat," Lillian said suddenly, finding her voice. "It's all you have left." Heath smiled slightly. "I've got the shirt on my back, and a roof over my head. That's more than some." He helped her onto the saddle, trying to be gentle but knowing every touch must hurt her injured back. She stifled a gasp but made no complaint. As they left town, Lillian felt eyes on her back. She was used to that, had felt men's stares since she was 16, but these felt different. Hostile. The scarred man and the gambler were watching them from outside the saloon. "Those men," she said. "They won't just let this go." Heath's face hardened. "No, they probably won't. But we've got a head start." They traveled in silence for a while, Heath leading the horse along a well-worn trail that wound through pine forests and across rolling meadows. Spring was just beginning to soften the Montana landscape, with wildflowers pushing up through the last patches of snow. "Thank you," Lillian said finally, "but I need to understand, what do you expect in return?" Heath stopped and looked up at her, his blue eyes serious. "Nothing. When we get to my place, I'll tend to your wounds. Give you food and a safe place to sleep. When you're healed, you can go wherever you want. Or stay and work for fair wages if you need time to figure things out." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Heath was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was Cherokee. After my father died, men came and took our land in Kansas. Said a half-breed woman couldn't own property. He swallowed hard. They sold her too. I was 14, too young to stop it. By the time I tracked her down 2 years later, she was gone. Consumption, they said." Lillian felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry." Heath nodded once, then continued walking. "No one deserves to be treated like property." As they crested a hill, Heath's ranch came into view. It wasn't much, a small cabin with a lean-to stable and corral, a chicken coop, and a vegetable garden just beginning to sprout. But to Lillian's eyes, after months of captivity, it looked like paradise. "It's not much," Heath said, echoing her thoughts. "But it's mine. Paid for. No one can take it." "It's beautiful," Lillian said honestly. The corners of Heath's mouth turned up slightly. "You must be delirious from pain." A small bark interrupted them as a black and white border collie raced out to greet them. "That's Scout," Heath said. "He's better company than most people." The dog circled them excitedly, then seemed to sense something was wrong and calmed, looking up at Lillian with concerned eyes. "He's a gentleman," Lillian said, the first hint of a smile touching her lips. Heath helped her down from the horse and led her inside the cabin. It was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a curtained-off sleeping space. "You can rest there," Heath said, nodding toward the bed. "I'll take the floor. But first, I need to clean those wounds." Lillian tensed. The thought of removing her dress in front of this stranger, even for medical purposes, filled her with dread. Heath seemed to read her thoughts. "I have a shirt you can use, and I'll only look at what I need to treat. I've tended wounds before." He moved with quiet efficiency, heating water on the stove and gathering clean rags, a bottle of whiskey, and a jar of salve. "This will hurt," he warned, setting everything on a small table beside the bed. "But infection would be worse." Lillian nodded, clutching the clean shirt he'd given her. "Could you?" She gestured for him to turn around. Heath immediately turned his back. "Tell me when you're ready." With trembling fingers, Lillian managed to undo the buttons of her ruined dress and slip it down to her waist, leaving her in her chemise. The fabric had stuck to her wounds in places, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out as she peeled it away. "Ready," she said, her voice barely audible. Heath turned, and his expression remained carefully neutral as he assessed the damage. "The cuts aren't too deep, but they need cleaning." He worked in silence, gently washing away the blood and dirt, then applying whiskey to disinfect the wounds. Lillian gripped the edge of the bed until her knuckles turned white, but didn't make a sound. "You're strong," Heath commented as he spread salve over the cleaned lacerations. "Most men would be howling." "I learned young not to show pain," Lillian said. "My father said it only encourages those who enjoy causing it." Heath's hands paused for a moment. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Lillian's throat tightened. "They killed him because he tried to protect me." Heath finished bandaging her back and stepped away. "You can put the shirt on now. I'll make us something to eat." As he turned to give her privacy again, Lillian said, "My name is Lillian. Lillian Kane." Heath glanced back. "It's good to meet you, Lillian Kane. I wish it had been under better circumstances." Over a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, Lillian told Heath her story. How outlaws had raided their homestead near Dodge City, killing her father and taking her captive. How she'd been passed from one group to another, heading west, always managing to fight back just enough to avoid the worst abuse, but never quite escaping, until she ended up at that auction block in Redemption Creek. "I need to get word to my brother," she said. "He's a doctor in St. Louis. He'll help me get home." Heath nodded. "When you're stronger, we can send a telegram from town. But those men might still be looking for you." "You've done enough," Lillian said firmly. "I won't bring more trouble to your door." Heath's mouth quirked up in a half-smile. "Trouble seems to find me whether I invite it or not." That night, despite Lillian's protests, Heath slept on a bedroll on the floor, Scout curled up beside him. Lillian lay awake for hours in Heath's bed, the cleanest, softest place she'd been in months. She should have been afraid, alone in a cabin with a man she barely knew. But something about Heath Daniels made her feel safer than she had since her father died. The next morning, Lillian woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Heath moving quietly around the cabin. She watched through half-closed eyes as he added wood to the fire and set a kettle to boil. There was a gentleness to his movements that belied his rugged appearance. "I know you're awake," he said without turning around. Scout always knows, and he's been watching you for the past 5 minutes. Lillian opened her eyes fully to see the border collie sitting attentively by the bed. Good morning to you too, Scout. She sat up gingerly, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandaged back. How bad is it? Heath asked, pouring coffee into a tin cup. I've had worse, Lillian said, then shook her head. No, that's not true. But I'll heal. Heath handed her the coffee. There's no need to be brave for my sake. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Lillian felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the hot liquid. She quickly looked down at her cup. What will you do now? She asked. You spent all your money. Heath shrugged. Start over. I've done it before. Because of me. Because I chose to. Heath corrected her. My choice, my responsibility. After breakfast, Heath needed to tend to his livestock and chores. Lillian insisted on helping despite her injuries, and he reluctantly agreed to let her feed the chickens and gather eggs. Just don't overdo it, he warned. Those wounds need time to heal properly. But Lillian was determined to earn her keep. By midday, she had not only fed the chickens, but also swept the cabin and started a stew with vegetables from Heath's root cellar. It was the least she could do for the man who had sacrificed everything for a stranger. When Heath came in from mending fences, he stopped short at the sight of her stirring a pot on the stove. His shirt too big on her slender frame, her auburn hair tied back with a strip of cloth. You didn't have to do that, he said. Lillian glanced over her shoulder. I wanted to. I'm not an invalid. No, you're certainly not that. There was a note of admiration in his voice that made her cheeks warm. They fell into a tentative routine over the next few days. Heath would work the ranch while Lillian took care of the cabin and cooking, her strength returning a little more each day. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes comfortable in silence. Lillian learned that Heath had come to Montana 5 years ago, determined to build something of his own. He told her about his struggles and small triumphs, about the harsh winters and breathtaking springs. He never spoke about women in his life, and she didn't ask. In turn, she told him about growing up in Kansas with her father and brother, about her mother who had died of fever when Lillian was 12, about her dreams of someday teaching school. You still can, Heath said. When you get back to civilization. Lillian smiled sadly. Perhaps, if anyone will hire a woman with my history. Heath's expression darkened. You did nothing wrong. Nothing happened to you that was your choice or your fault. The world doesn't always see it that way, Lillian replied softly. On the 5th day, as Lillian was hanging laundry outside, she spotted riders approaching, 3 of them, moving fast. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the scarred man from the auction. Heath! She called urgently, dropping the wet shirt she was holding. He emerged from the barn instantly, reading the situation at a glance. Get inside. Bar the door. No, Lillian said firmly. I won't hide while you face them alone. Heath gave her a hard look, then nodded once. Stay behind me. As the riders approached, Heath stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his holster. Scout stood at his side, hackles raised. That's far enough, Heath called when they were about 50 yards out. The men reined in their horses. The scarred man, clearly the leader, smiled unpleasantly. Daniels, he called. We've come for what's ours. Nothing here belongs to you, Miller, Heath replied, and Lillian realized the men knew each other. Miller laughed. That woman was sold to me by some boys down Kansas way. I tracked her for weeks after she ran. Then you stole her from me, fair and square. You can't steal what wasn't rightfully owned, Heath said evenly. She's a free woman. We got papers that say different. Forgeries, Lillian called out. stepping up beside Heath despite his warning glance. "My name is Lillian Kane. My father was William Kane of Dodge City. I am a freeborn American citizen, not property to be bought and sold." Miller spat. Big words from a woman who fetched just over 200 at auction. Heath's hand tightened on his gun. "You need to leave. Now." 3 against 1, Daniels, Miller said. "Bad odds." 4. Came a new voice from behind them. Lillian turned to see an older man with graying hair and a sheriff's badge approaching on horseback from the other direction. He had a rifle trained on Miller and his companions. "Didn't expect to see you out this way, Sheriff Taylor," Miller said, his smile faltering. "Got a telegram from St. Louis," the sheriff replied. "Seems a Dr. Levi Kane has been looking for his missing sister, offering a substantial reward." He nodded to Lillian. "Madam." Lillian felt light-headed with relief. Levi had been searching for her. "These men kidnapped me," she told the sheriff. "Killed my father." The sheriff's expression hardened. "That so? Well now, that changes things considerably." He cocked his rifle. "Miller, you and your boys are going to drop those guns nice and slow." For a tense moment, Lillian thought Miller would resist. But with the sheriff's rifle and Heath's hand on his gun, the odds had shifted. Miller gave a curt nod, and all 3 men disarmed. "This isn't over, Daniels," Miller growled as the sheriff bound their hands. "Yes, it is," Heath replied firmly. After the sheriff had taken the prisoners away, promising to return the next day to take Lillian's full statement, an awkward silence fell between her and Heath. "Your brother's been looking for you," Heath said finally. "You'll be able to go home soon." Lillian nodded, surprising herself with how conflicted she felt. "Yes." "That's good," Heath said, his voice carefully neutral. "That's what you wanted." "It is," she agreed, though her heart wasn't in it. That evening, as they sat by the fire, the usual comfortable silence felt strained. Lillian watched Heath's profile in the flickering light, noting the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he stared into the flames. "I never thanked you properly," she said at last. Heath looked up. "There's no need." "There is," Lillian insisted. "You gave everything you had for a stranger. You risked your life. Why?" Heath was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "When I saw you there, so defiant despite everything they'd done to you, couldn't walk away. Something in me recognized something in you." The simple honesty of his words touched Lillian deeply. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers were calloused from hard work, but his touch was gentle as he curled them around hers. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Without your savings?" Heath shrugged. "Keep working. The land is good. I'll build it back up. Alone." His eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. "That depends." Lillian understood what he wasn't saying. "I should go back to St. Louis. My brother would want you to be happy," Heath finished for her. "I barely know you," Lillian whispered, though it didn't feel true. In these few days, she'd seen Heath's character more clearly than men she'd known for years. "I know," Heath said, "and you've been through hell. The last thing you need is some man making demands or declarations. When the sheriff comes tomorrow, you should go with him. Go back to your family, your life." Lillian felt tears pricking her eyes. He was giving her freedom, real freedom, not just from captivity but from obligation. Even to him. "And if I wanted to come back?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Heath's hand tightened on hers. "I'd be here." When Sheriff Taylor returned the next morning, he brought news that Miller and his men had confessed to kidnapping Lillian and several other women, selling them across the territories. They would hang for murder and human trafficking. "Your brother wired money for your passage to St. Louis," the sheriff told Lillian. Train leaves Redemption Creek tomorrow morning. Lillian thanked him, aware of Heath standing silently by the corral, his face unreadable. After the sheriff left, she approached Heath. I need to see my brother, she said. I need to tell him what happened face to face. Heath nodded. I understand. But this isn't my home anymore, Lillian continued. St. Louis, cities, after everything that's happened. I need open spaces, room to breathe. Hope flickered in Heath's eyes, but he kept his voice steady. Montana has plenty of both. Lillian took a deep breath. Would you wait for me? If I promised to come back? Instead of answering, Heath closed the distance between them and gently took her face in his hands. His kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Lillian answered by sliding her arms around his neck, ignoring the twinge from her healing back. When they finally broke apart, Heath rested his forehead against hers. I'd wait as long as it takes. The next morning, Heath drove Lillian to town in a borrowed wagon. The ride was mostly silent, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. At the small train station, Heath handed Lillian the ticket the sheriff had left for her. Your brother will be happy to see you. Yes, Lillian agreed, but I won't stay long. Heath's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Don't make promises you might not want to keep once you're back in civilization. You might remember all the things you've been missing. Lillian shook her head. The only thing I'll be missing is you. As the train whistle sounded in the distance, Heath pulled something from his pocket, a simple ring carved from wood. It's not much, he said apologetically. But I made it last night. Something to remember Montana by. Lillian took it, slipping it onto her finger. Fit perfectly. It's beautiful. Like its owner, Heath said softly. The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Passengers began to disembark. Last chance to change your mind, Heath said, only half joking. Lillian stood on tiptoe and kissed him, not caring who saw. I'm not changing my mind. I'm coming back. I'll be waiting, Heath promised. Right here. As Lillian boarded the train, she looked back one last time. Heath stood tall on the platform, his hat in his hands, his blue eyes never leaving hers until the train pulled away. 3 months later, the same train pulled into Redemption Creek Station. Lillian stepped onto the platform, her heart racing as she scanned the small crowd. For a terrible moment, she didn't see him. Then the crowd parted, and there he was, Heath Daniels, looking exactly as she remembered. Their eyes met across the platform, and everything else faded away. Lillian dropped her bag and ran to him. Heath caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that told her everything she needed to know. She was home. You came back, he whispered against her hair. I promised I would, Lillian replied, drawing back to look at him. I don't break my promises. Heath's smile lit up his entire face. Neither do I, and I've got one for you now. He took her hand, where she still wore the wooden ring he'd made her. Lillian Kane, will you marry me? Not because I saved you, not because you owe me anything, but because somehow, in the middle of all that darkness, we found each other. Lillian felt tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, she said simply. Yes. 1 year to the day after Heath had paid everything he had to free her from the auction block, Lillian Kane became Lillian Daniels in a small ceremony at their ranch. Sheriff Taylor officiated, and Scout served as ring-bearer, carrying the simple gold bands on a ribbon around his neck. Under a perfect Montana sky, they pledged their lives to each other. Two people who had lost everything only to find something more precious than either had imagined possible. No one will ever hurt you again, Heath promised as he slipped the ring on her finger, replacing the wooden one he'd carved, which she now wore on a chain around her neck. "And no one will ever take what's yours again," Lillian vowed in return. As the sun set over the mountains, casting golden light across the land they now shared, Heath and Lillian danced under the stars, surrounded by new friends and the promise of a future built on love, respect, and the freedom they had both fought so hard to secure. In the wild Montana territory, where law was still a tenuous thing and survival often depended on one's own strength and determination, they had found not just safety in each other's arms, but a home neither had dared to dream possible.